Hi everyone, it's Caitlin again. So by now you've come up with a list of the factors and processes that influence the survival and growth of a plant in your garden. You've also narrowed that list down to the 10 to 12 things that you think will have the biggest influence on a plant's survival. Next, we want to take your list of factors and turn them into a model that can help us think more directly about your research question and how certain plant traits affect how well a plant can grow and survive without getting eaten by insects. So we can do this by creating a computer model that will help us see how different factors in the system interact. We can use SageModeler, which is this platform here. It's a really cool online tool that you can use to create computer models of different systems. On the next slide, you'll find a link to the model that we've set up for Project Crystal. And at this point, our model is going to address a specific question related to your research question. How does your chosen plant adaptation affect whether or not a plant can grow and survive without getting eaten by insects? In my case, the question would be, how does leaf size affect whether or not a plant in your garden can grow and survive without getting eaten by insects? So I'm going to go ahead and change the model in question here to reflect my specific question, but this will be different for each of you based on the adaptation you chose. Leaf size. So to start, we'll need to set up the two conditions in our experiment. You'll see that there's pictures on the upper left-hand side. If you open the arrow, there are even more. You're also welcome to search for more by clicking New Image. It can be helpful to move the modeling question out of the way. Like if I wanted to search water, some options will come up here. You can always add those to your bank of images. But to set up my two conditions, because we are comparing how leaf size affects whether or not a plant can grow and survive without getting eaten by insects in my particular model, I'm going to grab two different plants from my images and to drag and drop them into the workspace. And then I want to label them. So because we're investigating the survival of plants, I'm going to change the name to survival of small leaf plants and large leaf plants. All right, so now we have two different plants in our two different conditions. But the other aspect of this is we want to know how they grow and survive without getting eaten by insects. So we want two different insect scenarios in our model as well. So I'm going to go ahead and find this little caterpillar. And like before, I'm going to make them separate for our two different conditions. So I'm actually going to drag two of these in here. And I'll name them insects on small leaf plants and insects on large leaf plants. All right, so now that we have set up two different conditions, it's time to start adding any different factors from your list, both abiotic components, biotic components, and processes. We'll start by demonstrating an abiotic component. Maybe I'll add sunlight to the model. And then for a biotic component, I'm going to drag in birds. So once you are adding more and more components to your models, one of the most important steps here is to set the relationships between them. So to start with, let's set the relationships between our plants and our caterpillars. So to connect things, I'm going to take the little arrow icon from the factor that I think will affect our plant and drag it over to the plant. So I think the insects on small leaf plants will affect the survival of our small leaf plants. And then to set what that relationship is, you can click on small leaf plants and then click on this little arrow at the right hand side of the screen. And now it says an increase in insects on small leaf plants causes the survival of small leaf plants to increase, decrease, or vary. So if we have more of those insects eating the plants, do you think that the plant is going to have a better chance at survival or maybe worse? I'm going to say more insects means slightly less survival. By a lot, the same, a little bit, and that's up to you of how you think this relationship will work. If more insects really dramatically affects our survival, or if maybe it only affects it a little bit, or more and more as you get even more insects, then it's up to you to set that relationship. You can do the same for the other one here. For our other factors, let's make sure to name them. Sunlight. And what factors do you think sunlight will influence? I think it's going to affect the survival of both our large leaf plants and our small leaf plants. And every time you add a factor, you can think about if it affects both of our different conditions. And now we have another factor that we can add here. An increase in sunlight causes survival of large leaf plants too, and the same, you can choose the relationship, as well as for the small leaf plants. Do you think that relationship will be the same for the big leaf plants and the small leaf plants, or do you think it might be different? It's up to you to decide. Some of your factors are going to have direct influences to the survival of your plants, whereas some might be indirect. For example, what factor do you think the birds affect the population size of? Do they really directly affect our plants, or do you think they affect other things in the system? So set up your two conditions with plants and insects for each condition. Set the relationship between them, and then add all of your other factors and draw connections to them. Specifically, connections to both sides of the system. All right, go ahead and get started with your model with your research team, adding all of the components and processes and all of the interactions that you think are in the system.